I'm Deborah Owens, America's Wealth Coach, and it's time to get wealthy. You're going to learn exactly what you need to know to finally achieve the level of financial success that you desire and you deserve. Chadwick Boseman, Aretha Franklin, Prince, all passed recently, all passed away, and yet they all did not have a will. But the truth is, they're amongst the 72% of African Americans who don't have a will. And what it does is it really can cost your estate hundreds of thousands of dollars in their case. Well, today we're having a conversation with someone who I call the accidental estate planning attorney. And she's going to be sharing what you need to do to really get your financial house in order so that you can create legacy wealth. So here's what they don't want you to know about wills and estate planning and why they are so important. First, wills and estate planning, they allow you to streamline processes for your family so they know exactly what you need to do. Secondly, they help you avoid all of those probate and legal fees. And finally, you get to control the distribution of your assets and decide who gets what. So that's exactly what our conversation is about today with my guest. Amy Griffin Joyner is an attorney and she is managing partner of the Griffin Firm. She works with estate planning and probate and businesses to help them protect and preserve their wealth. And I'm so excited to welcome her on Get Wealthy today. Welcome to our program, Amy.
Thank you so much for having this important conversation, Deborah. It's a pleasure indeed to be with you today.
Well, I called you the accidental estate planning attorney because I know a little bit about your background. But tell us, why do you feel like this is a topic that is so important and decide to really focus on that as as your major focus in your practice?
Well, it started off with the fact that I have these civil rights parents. I had these civil rights parents that were always marching and carrying on for equal justice. And what I realized is that one of the greatest areas where we as Black people have no control or lost control is because we don't have wealth. And that oftentimes there's not the love of money, but money does indeed provide resource and power. So your voice, your opinion matters more when you have access to assets. And so when I realized the racial wealth gap continues to grow, I look back to see what are the things that happen. So my first thought was, okay, shoot, we got to be about building businesses. We know that the employer who has more money than the employee, so let's build a business. So when I went to law school at 40, because I was mindful of this disparity, and I was working with businesses after creating a Black chamber, and the business owners would pass away. And as such, the assets that they have grown were dissipated because there wasn't a strategic plan to make it happen. So went back to law school and got my LLM, which is a Master of Laws in Elder Law and Estate Planning, so that we can think about how we, not just the basics, but how can we strategically plan to pass on wealth and to build upon it.
Well, I'm glad you said that because that's the exact framework that we talk about on Get Wealthy to achieve really financial success. And that's mindset, strategy, and execution. So that's where I want to start with you. Mindset. That statistic that 72% of African Americans don't have a will. Well, 67% of all Americans don't have a will. So it's not like it's a huge differentiation. However, what is the mindset then that prevents people from establishing a will or even having this conversation about money and assets and how they'll be passed on?
There's a couple of things that contributes. First and foremost, a lot of times people say, I don't have anything, right? I don't have anything to create an estate. So that's a conversation. But then more often than also, I find that people are embarrassed. And so they aren't willing to be vulnerable and have the conversation about what assets they do have. Because so often we think that we should have so much more. And therefore, don't want to talk to anybody about anything and think, I'm going to just wait until I have something to really be able to be planful. But it is, we need to get sort of beyond our pride, because what know is that when we don't necessarily know what's going to happen, very few of us know the exact date that we will need to have that estate plan is. So I encourage people to get over your pride and to be thinking about not only what I don't have now, but how can I strategically build for that next generation so they're not having the same conversation that we're having now. We just don't like to talk about the bad things that can happen. But the reality is, the truth that will happen is that we will, very few of us, if any of us, will leave this position, this life alive.
Well, I remember someone saying to me very young, well, the only thing guaranteed is death and taxes. And there's truth to that. And yet we don't plan for it. And it is interesting when you talk about building a state and building wealth. Other cultures really use estate planning as a way to create wealth. I can remember an Asian friend telling me that in their family, they actually pooled their resources and paid the premium on insurance, knowing that for their elder or their parent, knowing that that is going to create a significant windfall. And it's one of, in most cases, the few ways that you can get a distribution and it pass on and not have to pay taxes on it. So to that end, just staying with mindset just a bit, because I do think it's that mortality a part of it that we don't like to talk about, death or that sort of thing. What is the mindset shift that we could frame for our audience that can help them to want to look at this not as a negative, but as a positive?
I like people to think of it as like, let's make a life legacy. Let's strategically build for our future. Let's invest in ourselves and our children so that we can make sure, because as you're talking about your Asian folks, friends who have built in for more mature people, I encourage people, grandparents, to buy insurance policies on their grandchildren once they are born. Get that $1 million life insurance policy so that they can pull from and invest in, so that we know that we are guaranteed multi-generational asset distribution from the moment that grandchild's born. If we are thoughtful about it, again, don't think about it about I'm dying, but think about I'm building, investing for my future, right?
So and it's interesting. I do know, as someone who's been in the investment industry for so long, is that life insurance is often looked at as death insurance, right? Even though it's called life insurance. And part of what people don't understand is that part of estate planning is really leveraging the different types of investment vehicles for different purposes. I mean, I have my own feelings about mixing investing with life insurance, but at the end of the day, the reason that life insurance has its tax deferred, if you will, you can put money in it and not pay taxes on it like an IRA, is because it has that death benefit or that mortality expense. And so what we're saying to the audience is you need to look at estate planning really more as life planning. So I love the way you term that. And then one other thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of mindset as well is some people even have the mindset of, well, all of this is going to happen after I die, so why should I really even care about it? And they sometimes have significant assets, homes, retirement accounts. What do people need to understand about having that mindset and how it can impact your legacy, or when your assets pass on and you haven't prepared for it?
Two parts to that. First and foremost is estate planning. Comprehensive estate planning is far more than just what happens when you die, right? It also happens, the conversation of what happens if I am incapacitated. Who can make a decision for me, and who can guide my healthcare? Who can manage my assets? that we do care about, that we are very mindful of, because there is a Netflix movie that talks about I care a lot, that if you don't pick somebody, oftentimes the court will pick somebody for you. And that it can be devastating if you imagine that it's just somebody who is paid to care for you, or as opposed to someone who cares about you, making decisions about your life, if you can't make decisions for yourself. So first and foremost, I encourage people to be thoughtful about that. And then if there is anybody that you care about, realizing that you're leaving behind, that you're creating a whole level of distress and angst, and oftentimes fights among the people that you have left behind. And unfortunately, I say all the time, more often than not, people don't call the lawyer because they're having a great day. They're calling a lawyer because something has gone astray. So I encourage people to be thoughtful about, if there are people that you love, then those are the people that you're going to be hurting if you don't make that plan.
You brought up visually, I was thinking, and I also watched that Netflix movie, and it really, people were making basically a business out of becoming what is the caretaker, which really is the money taker of people who don't leave an estate. And I can even, personally, I will say that when my own father went into long-term care, one of the people in the long-term care facility was actually going to petition the court to be his guardian. And the attorney who, went to investigate said, how is this even possible? And he has 4 living children, right? And so what we don't know can really cost us when we don't know the impact. So I'm so glad you brought that up.
So actually, building on that, because you have good credit, you can become the guardian. But if somebody doesn't have a good credit score, they can't get bonded, right? So if we are dependent upon the court system to allow you to serve, you have to have good credit and significant resources to pay for the bond. So that's because they didn't plan. If they plan, they can have a power of attorney, and that takes care of it. No need for a bond. There's no need for that insurance. And so even if they have had an error in the past that they want to, that they have corrected, they've made the amends or whatever, and now they're living the straight and narrow life, that opportunity to serve as the power of attorney to care for their loved one is still available if they plan ahead. But if they don't, they cannot.
Well, I mean, that's talk about mindset, and just, I think what you mentioned there, Amy, is that we don't even know what we don't know, and we don't necessarily consider, right, the unintended consequences of not making a decision. So really, not making a decision, not planning, is actually making a decision, and oftentimes not the best one. So when we come back, the next thing I want to talk about, because we've covered, a number of different concepts just in talking about mindset shifts, right, around estate planning. When we come back, what I want to talk about is strategy. So if you haven't done any estate planning, or maybe even some of you have started, maybe you have a will, what are the other things that you need to consider to make sure that you are creating this legacy wealth that can be transferred on in the manner that will, first of all, protect it, and second of all, preserve it from generation to generation? So don't go anywhere, folks. We'll be right back.
Let's be honest, as successful women, we're crushing it. Maxed out 401k and Roth IRA? Check. Aggressive savings and investments? Check. Yet, the freedom our success was supposed to buy can leave us stuck on the 6-figure hamster wheel, watching retirement slip further down the road. There's another way. Get coaching courses and community at wealthyu.com.
Pull up a chair, take your seat. The Black Tape with me, Dr. Greg Carr, here on the Black Star Network. Every week, we'll take a deeper dive into the world we're living in. Join the conversation only on the Black Star Network.
Welcome back, everyone. We're having a fascinating conversation about a topic that many of us kind of don't want to talk about, and it is estate planning. And I'm Deborah Owens, and I'm host of Get Wealthy, and I wanted to tackle this topic with someone who has great knowledge about it, but also it's very purposeful in how she is helping families really create estate plans and plan for intergenerational wealth. And so my guest today is Amy Griffin Joyner. She's an estate planning attorney and a managing partner of the Griffin Law Firm. And what I did not mention, also founded the Association of Estate Planners. So Amy, thanks so much for coming on Get Wealthy this evening. Today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
So we talked about mindset. Now I want to talk about strategy. And one of the things that you mentioned in the last segment was really the fact that estate planning isn't just a will, right? There are there's other plans or other documents that you need to have your house in financial order. And I think so often when we think about estate planning, we think about death, but I think you mentioned something that, far too many of us don't think about, and that's in the event that we are incapacitated and can't take care of ourselves. So in terms of strategy, let's talk to our viewers about what are the things that you need to have in place in order to have a comprehensive estate plan that's going to make sure you're covered in every area.
Absolutely. Now, I say to people at the age of 18, you should have the fundamental documents. And the fundamental documents include, again, a power of attorney, which gives somebody capacity to act on your behalf for financial matters. And then the second one is a healthcare packet that includes a proxy who can speak for you if you can't speak for yourself, who can have just access to your health information, talk to your healthcare providers. And thirdly, what directions, what guidance would you give to someone where you wanted about your healthcare decisions? Like if you would want to be on life-sustaining treatment, if you would want to have tube feedings, if you get to make those decisions. But thirdly, it is the last will and testament. And the last will and testament directs the probate court. Hear me, directs the probate court as to what you would want to have done for the distribution of your assets. Because if you don't have a will, the court, whichever jurisdiction you live in, would be glad to direct where your assets go. But really, again, on TV, they have the reading of the will, and they go into the lawyer's office and the lawyer reads, or the conference room, and the lawyer reads the will. And people call me and say, I want to have a reading of the will. And I encourage people to realize that my reading and your reading isn't any different, and I will gladly read the will to you if you'd like me to, but that's not going to have any impact on anything. So it is just a TV for drama. And more often than not, I read the will to people when they are afraid to tell somebody what's in it, but it has no impact. Because again, I tell people all the time, probate is one of the biggest scams, the biggest revenue generators for the government.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Amy, because what people don't understand is everyone has incentives, right? Every entity has an incentive, and typically it's the exchange of resources. Yeah, you want to be able to do the right thing, but what I welcome is just giving people have them understand what needs to be in place, and it is kind of sobering, the fact that you said that at the age of 18, you need to have these medical directives in place, because we don't often think that we're not going to live to a very old age. And so one of the things that we didn't discuss, I think when people hear trust, and what is the difference between a will and a trust? And do I have to have like a gazillion dollars before I would even consider a trust?
So the difference between the will and the trust is the will requires the government to be involved in the distribution of your assets. First, you have to pay the court, depending on how much money you have. The more money you have, the more money you pay the court. But then they oversee the distribution of your assets, and it's all public. Everybody gets to know what you had and who you gave it to based on the will. Because anybody anywhere can walk into the courthouse and say, I need a copy of the will. But the trust creates the opportunity to direct your assets where you want it to go, how you want it to go, and typically over time. And so you can, and it's private. There is no court involvement, but you can make the orders and the controls and the plans and the strategies for wealth creation, not just for your generation, but for multiple generations. It's about strategic planning. I think as Deborah said earlier, if you can make a plan for how do you continue to increase assets for your family, right? You don't want to just leave that $1 million for your 19-year-old child, but you can plan for it over time.
Well, Amy, it's interesting you said that, because I do feel like what would benefit our audience is if you could give an example. Certainly, I don't want you to divulge there is client attorney privilege, but just give us an example of someone who created a trust and how it really benefit that, and created that strategic plan with a trust, and how it really benefited their family.
Oh, absolutely. So one of my examples is that this family, actually was a single parent who left the life insurance. The beneficiary was the trust. And she was able to say, so let's say it was $1 million and a percentage of the income of the assets. Now, the money was gathered after she passed away as a death certificate. I mean, as part of the death benefit, the life insurance was paid out. It was invested. And so the income that was produced as part of the investment, she was mindful of, so that she wanted to make sure that there were assets that 40% were distributed just because, 10% because of the rules that she put in place if the kids went to college or they needed the down payment of the house, and then 10% would incentivize the values that they have. For example, if they were if they wanted to buy a house, she would give them some money. And so, but there was money that goes retained in the trust so that it continued to grow. So part of that income stayed in the trust. And so the income that could be invested was even greater. This way she was able to buy houses with and for the children. So she can strategically plan not only for her kids, but for her grandchildren as well. One of the examples that I posted, it was saying that she bought that $1 million life insurance policy for her grandchildren, and it's in her trust. So when the grandchild's applying for financial aid, it doesn't show up on their FAFSA. So as part of their resources. So there are so many strategic ways in which we can build. We've had people who funded the mortgage for the house, for the purchase of a house, but it helped the child to indeed have ownership as well as build credit. So there are so many strategic ways that you can do it. But one of my favorite ways is I have a house and 2 kids. If I put my house in the trust, I don't have to worry about when I die that they get half a house. And so they sell the property. And so that's one of the ways that we can strategically plan to build real estate capacity over time, or maintain that real estate capacity over time. So I encourage people to be thinking about what is the long-term plan as opposed to just for today or just right after I pass away.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up, because in my experience in investments, one of the worst things that can ever happen to you is you get a windfall of a large sum of money. And that's exactly what happens if you just name that beneficiary on the policy and they get that lump sum of money. If they haven't learned how to manage money, I think of lottery winners, anyone that, hasn't learned how to manage money, it's very difficult to value it because you didn't earn it. So, my mind is just, I'm thinking about other situations where, the parents left a life insurance policy to a child that was just 23 years old. And what do you think the first thing they went out and did?
They
Just
bought
to
a
guess.
car. They bought a car.
They bought the most expensive car they could. And so that's what doesn't happen when you do proper planning. So this is a great conversation. Amy, I'm glad that's why I wanted you to show some specific examples, because I think so often when we're talking about this topic, we're talking about it in the abstract and not in real terms. And so when we come back, I want to now go to the next aspect of this, because knowledge is not power. You're learning a lot on Get Wealthy and a lot about strategies and ways that you can build wealth. But the most important thing you need to understand is that knowledge is not power. Knowledge correctly applied is. And so when we come back, I want to talk a little bit with Amy Griffin, estate planning attorney, about, okay, now I've listened to what you said. How do I execute on this? Who do I need to know? Where do I need to go? So execution, mindset, strategy, and now execution when we come back.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jackie Hood Martin, and I have a question for you. Ever feel as if your life is teetering and the weight and pressure of the world is consistently on your shoulders? Well, let me tell you, living a balanced life isn't easy. Join me each Tuesday on Black Star Network for A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie. We'll laugh together, cry together, pull ourselves together, and cheer each other on. So join me for new shows each Tuesday on Black Star Network, A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Deborah Owens, America's Wealth Coach, and we're talking about getting wealthy and creating generational wealth on Get Wealthy today. And my guest today is estate planning attorney Amy Griffin Joyner, and she's sharing with us specifically why estate planning is so important and what you need to do. And so welcome to the program again, Amy. Now I want to talk just a little bit about, because I think this is the hardest part. I mean, even we had our will done, and then we needed to do further estate planning. It's kind of like we finally, my husband and I, had to say, hey, let's book a date, with the attorney. And so I want to talk now. We've talked about mindset, and that's really not being focused so much on if I die, or, it doesn't matter, understanding the implication of that. And then why having estate planning strategy is so important. Love the story you gave of someone who was single, but wanted to make sure that her assets were distributed properly and what she could do strategically. So now I'm asking this question for the audience. Where do I go? How do I find someone to help me with this? And what are the questions I need to ask?
It will sound, what I'm going to first say is going to sound simple, but it is really important to like the person that you're working with. You have to feel so comfortable that you will tell them your secrets. Like, again, that you're not going to be embarrassed about saying, well, we have this extra child, or one of my children has a spending issue, or, that who they are. You don't want to feel restricted in the conversation. So you really have to like the person. And that seems simple. That seems almost extra. But no, I encourage you to this is someone that you want to have a lifetime relationship with, as opposed to regretting that you have to see them again. Sort of, while the conversation may not be an easy one, but make sure that you're enjoying that conversation, number one. Number two, don't go to a cardiologist when your feet are hurt. right? So go to an estate planning attorney who indeed focuses on this kind of work. It's not just a matter of being a lawyer. Now, I tell you, we all have that, the JD, but I tell you that it makes a difference if you're going to a solo practitioner and they practice estate planning, real estate, divorce, criminal law, as well as constitutional law, and it's one person. I encourage people to make sure that the primary area of practice is indeed estate planning, because it is a nuanced field, and so I expect people to be able to have those conversations that when we learn from it, each experience we have. Now, then we can know what laws are changed, because laws change regularly. I think it's one of the best ways that lawyers get to stay in business is because the law changes, and we want to make sure that your estate plan takes advantage of those things that change. I had a client the other day, we were talking about her rocket lawyer will. And that means you didn't have a conversation, just what forms of there's a conversation that helps you really move from your desired outcomes to creating a strategy that works. Now, we've had people, come to us with Susie Orman packages, rocket lawyers, and then it's like, well, you need to have a conversation, because that's where the true nuanced strategies come together. It's not a one size fits all. And so we encourage people to speak to a professional. And it's not just because Johnny down the street has a will too, that he can help you with yours, right? So make sure that you have truly a strategic plan with a trusted professional who's doing the work. And so have the conversation.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I did want to delve into do it yourself. That's one of the things that in this, as technology has advanced, you have all of these kind of, before you go to an office supply store and you get like a boilerplate template, right, that says fill in the blanks, here's your will. Now you have all of these very large and sophisticated technologically advanced platforms that say they can do this for you. And yeah, you just, like the rocket lawyer, like the, I forget who the other.
LegalZoom.
Yeah, LegalZoom. That's exactly what I was thinking of. So my thought is, I just want the audience to understand what is the downside of using the do it so. You just said, yeah, you didn't have a conversation, but let's really talk about what are the downsides. Have you ever had someone who has had that kind of service, use that kind of service, and then when it came to distribute that assets, it put them in a precarious position?
Unfortunately, far too often. And we've had people, especially when, again, the greatest asset is typically the house, right? In many cases. And if you don't plan accordingly, because first and foremost, we try to tell people avoid probate in general. But if you have a will that says, okay, that this house is supposed to go to, let's say that I created the will, I want my house to go to Courtney, right? But we go through the probate process, and I didn't talk to anybody, and so I write it out. My house goes to Courtney, and I have another child too, named Franklin. And what happened was, because we didn't plan and we didn't talk to anybody, and then I said the remainder of stuff gets divided between all three of my kids. Well, what happened in this case was there was a probate, goes through the probate process because they didn't tell anybody to avoid it. Number one, because the will was a download thing, it didn't say avoiding bond. So that means they had to pay for bond, which meant there was a couple $100. Then there were fees because there was a funeral that was paid for. So that was a couple $1,000. In order to pay for those things, and there wasn't enough cash, the house had to be sold. Once the house was sold to pay for the expenses, because nobody told them how to avoid that, then it didn't get to go to Courtney. It was no longer a house, it was cash, and then it was divided between the three. So no one explained that to them because they didn't talk to anybody. So we encourage people. We've had people who just signed it in the wrong spot because They didn't understand who were where and how. It wasn't explained. There is so much to be said in having, the scripture says there is safety in a multitude of counsel. And so talk to somebody who knows what they're doing. Just, it's just not, there's just
Yeah.
so many ways there are errors.
And I do think that so often, people, when they think about what something's going to cost, but it's kind of like financial ignorance is expensive and you either pay now or pay later. But the other
Pay
question
more
I have
later.
for you, because I do think that for so many families, right? Like I was responsible for handling my parents' finances as they aged. And dementia, memory problems came on. Some folks in our audience know their parents or a senior loved one doesn't have this in place. And so the other question is, how do you broach that topic? What is your advice about broaching that topic with family members so you can get the family's finances in order?
So oftentimes I say to people, are yours? Because they say, oh yeah, I can't get my parents to do it. And I said, have you done it? And I think that sometimes parents think you're talking to them to do it because you're thinking they're going to die. And so if you say, I'm doing this and I want you to sort of be on the same journey as I am on, or I've completed it and this is how I felt. I felt so much better now that it's done. That, you can't speak to what you haven't experienced. That's why I encourage people to, first and foremost, to say, yes, this is what happened and these are the outcomes. This is why I did it. Because that helps create a sort of a familiarity or comfort in that process. So it's not something that's new and novel that you don't have any true experience about. And it's, I always love saying to people that we can change it next year, or we can change it the year after, or in 5 years or 10 years, because just because we have it doesn't mean we'll use it this year.
That's good. Because in my mind, Amy, what I thought about is how loving would it be if you went to your parents and said, I'm going through this process of estate planning. I've done my will and trust. Here, in the event something happens to me, here's what you all need to know. And that's a great segue into, oh, by the way, is this something that you've done and you need me to know? So that is a much better way. That's what I love about you, Amy. It's just, it's more than just papers, right? And numbers and that. It's much more than that. It is legacy, family, having these, what sometimes we may think is a difficult conversation, but also we just need to be able to handle these things artfully. And so when we come back, I want to wrap up this conversation with you saying analyze, optimize, maximize. So in everything that we've learned today, if we were to put all this stuff into action, I want you to tell us exactly what we need to do. So don't go anywhere, folks. When we come back, it's analyze, optimize, and maximize.
Are the only bins that will accommodate larger rollerboards.
They put 10 in here?
10, and you don't come out till you die. And you eat him, you eat 10.
Oh my God.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation about estate planning, legacy wealth, It's so important. I shared that 72% of African Americans don't have a will, and because of it, so much of our legacy wealth is not passing on to our families, not being preserved, and we're not creating intergenerational wealth. So now back to Amy Griffin Joyner, who's going to share with us exactly what we need to first analyze, optimize, and maximize the information that she shared with us on the show today. So first, analyze. We just talked about some things. How do folks need to analyze their own specific situation?
One, I think that we need to truly assess what we have and where we're going, right? Knowing that who do we have as support systems, because we should have a fiduciary, a backup, and a backup. Knowing what our assets are we a taxable estate? Is there going to be inheritance? Are the people that we love, would they be negatively impacted by a surge of money? Unfortunately, money isn't always a blessing. I think Deborah mentioned that lottery winners are 4 times more apt to file bankruptcy. If there's a substance abuse issue, if there's a special needs concern where they're receiving benefits, you got to make sure that we are not passing off assets in a way that would truly create a negative impact on the person that we love. And so we need to make a true assessment of where we are and true assessment of what the assets are and the people that we love.
And then optimize. We covered a lot of ground. If I were to tackle one thing to get me started right on this journey, what would it be out of all things that we discussed?
The first thing I would do is be thoughtful about avoiding the probate process. Again, we are paying the court to give away our stuff to the people that we love. So we need to be thinking about what is our the best way to transfer those assets. Is it to have a beneficiary? Is it to transfer on death deed for your property? What are we thinking? Because our best opportunities are to be, actually, is to have the longest runway, right? So that we can be thinking about what we want as an end goal, but the longest runway gets you there, right? More strategically, as opposed to, we do a lot of in our firm crisis Medicaid planning, because if somebody needs to go into a nursing home and we're planning for it next month as opposed to 5 years from now, that strategic planning is very different. We optimize our opportunities by strategically planning with as much time frame as possible. I know that I'm sure that you talk a lot about yesterday was the better day to start, but today start now, because that's the next best time. So.
And then finally, just maximizing on this with our families, right? I just watched this. I need to have this conversation. I guess the first thing you said, hey, start with yourself. But if you wanted to figure out a way to convey this, to start to have these conversations with your family based on what we said they've learned today, where would you start with them?
So, it is, I know almost, you can find an estate planning seminar everywhere online, right? And we've been asked to come to family reunions because we know that we really do care about our family members, and we can be strategic in building out multiple generation planning. But we got to start by having the conversation about what's real, what's important, how we're willing to invest in our family and to take those steps and those efforts. And it may not be the easiest conversation, but once you've had it, once you've broached it, it makes it easier each time that you have to enhance it and to build upon it, as opposed to
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's one of the things that your practice does. You do a lot of educational webinars. So you really feel like getting the family educated so that they can kind of understand what the implications are. Please share with our audience how they can find your information on your certainly your practice, and then how they can learn about upcoming workshops that are coming up.
Sure. We have our website is easy to remember. The name of it's yourestateplanningattorney.com. Right. And so we have free workshops twice a month, one during the day, which is the first Friday of the month, and the third Monday in the evening. I'm excited about, actually, Deborah's participating in our Empowered to Prosper event next month in June on for women getting their financial and their life in order, because we're empowered to prosper. But it is we say get understanding. We know our people perish for the lack of knowledge. Get the information. And then, as Deborah says, the wisdom is the application of knowledge. Once you get it, do something with it. I hate to do the scary tactic. Let's look at building up, as opposed to the fact that if you don't plan, it really tears down. If you don't plan, we're doing the GoFundMe accounts. If you don't plan, we end up having arguments in our family. But let's do the building the legacy component. Let's do the wealthy you. And so not just wealthy because of what we're doing, but planning for our future and our children's future and our children's children's future. Let's strategically work together to build that.
And on Get Wealthy, that's exactly what we call the wealth mindset. So Amy Griffin, thanks so much for coming on Get Wealthy today. When we come back, the 3 takeaways from this show that you should learn and then understand and apply.
We're all impacted by the culture, whether we know it or not. From politics to music and entertainment, it's a huge part of our lives, and we're going to talk about it every day right here on The Culture with me, Faraji Muhammad, only on the Black Star Network.
I'm Deborah Owens, America's Wealth Coach. I'm so glad you joined us for this very important conversations, the conversations that we need to be having with our family around legacy wealth. So here are the 3 takeaways from today's show. First of all, a will, estate planning is not a need to, it's a have to if we want to preserve our estate. Secondly, something really, really important, I hope that you all were able to learn today, and that is that trust and estate planning are not just for the wealthy, they're for everyday people, and they allow you the opportunity to not have to have someone else dictate how your assets are distributed. And finally, estate planning will help you protect and preserve wealth and create legacy wealth from generation to generation. So thanks so much for joining us on Get Wealthy. I'm Deborah Owens, America's Wealth Coach. I hope you enjoyed today's show.